drastic decrease in the cell viability may be seen at doses below 0.1 milligram per milliliter. So it is generally accepted that surfactant properties they have a crucial influence on the interaction between the colloidal systems and the cells. Surface charge is decisive in the initial contact with the negatively charged cell membrane. Within this scenario, we know that cationic surfactants, they are associated with the capacity to insert insertion into the cell membrane and create pores and defects in the membrane integrity. And they are also known as sensitizers to the immune system. On the other hand, at least neutral or slightly positive surface charge may be a prerequisite for the internalization of the cargo. So this means internalization of the loaded compound, especially those with a high molecular weight, as happens with oligonucleotides and also with big peptides. So this figure here shows data on the cell viability determined after the exposure to positively and negatively charged lipid nanoparticles. As it can be seen, even formulations with positively charged particles, so which are identified with these red squares here, they can be formulated in a manner that allows their use in cell cultures well above 0.1 milligram per milliliter. So theoretically, up to 0.1 cationic, positively charged lipid nanoparticles are well tolerated by the cells. But we can also formulate with concentrations much above 0.1. We have reported that the impact on the cell viability of retinoblastoma cell line, this Ypsilon-79, can be controlled by limiting the content of a cationic lipid. The cationic lipid that we've used here was the CTAL. And these particles could be well tolerated up to 0.5% of cationic lipid in SLN formulation. Let's have a look on to the first example here of 0.25%. And we see that the particles, the cationic nanoparticles, were not toxic up to a range of between 10 and 50 microgram per milliliter. But a reduced cell viability significantly reduced the cell viability above, let's say, 50 to 75% when treated with a double of the concentration of the particles over the time of exposure. So this last column here, over the time, of course. So it should be noted that most of the positively charged lipid nanoparticles, they are formulated with simple and cheap cationic regions. So let's say like CTAP or stereolamine. But these cationic surfactants with a single chain, they favor the insertion into the cell membrane. So this means they are a bit more toxic. So the fact that cationic surfactants with the two alkyl chains are potentially less toxic than one alkyl chain-based cationic lipids, and the combination with neutral lipids, combining with neutral lipids, there is a great possibility to formulate cationic lipid nanoparticles with improved biocompatibility profile. Additional reports provide further insights about the risks associated with CTAP-based cationic nanoparticles. Apart from the membrane disruption documented by the increase of the lactate dehydrogenase concentration, shown here in the CTAP-loaded NLC, on the right-hand side of this slide, significant calcium release influx. Calcium influx was recorded, which subsequently led to neutrophil degranulation. So this data is not shown here in this slide. Importantly, is that membrane damage and the neutrophil degranulation was not observed when exposed to negatively charged lipid nanoparticles composed of steel palmitate and poloxamer 188 without the cationic lipid. However, when we compare between cationic NLC and cationic DLGA nanoparticles, so the results, they favor the use of polymeric nanoparticles over lipid nanoparticles when coated with CETAL, because these did not induce the cell damage to the as the extent seen in the NLC coated CETAL. Replacing CETAL by SME is another cationic compound, caused similar reduction in the cell viability, but did not cause neither calcium influx nor neutrophil degranulation. Another approach to use positively surface charge is the use of positively charged polymers, as happens with chitosan, polysaccharide, positively charged polysaccharide chitosan. So another point worth mention is the effect of particle size. So since lipid nanoparticles are being developed for various purposes and administration routes, the requirements for their average size also vary. So while parenteral applications require particles with small diameters, oral and dermal routes, they do not have such strict limits in terms of particle size. So with respect to cell internalization, it is generally accepted that the smaller the particles, the higher the internalization rate. Although there is evidence that phagocytic cells, they have the capacity to uptake objects of sizes up to few micrometers. There is, therefore, the importance to evaluate the range of particle sizes with respect to lipid nanoparticles, and we see that they vary broadly among the different published reports. So the particle size distribution is regarded as one of the most important physicochemical parameters with respect to nanoparticles when tested in cell cultures. Lipid nanoparticles, they tend to aggregate in an environment with high ionic strength, which is the case of cell culture medium. So the size distribution in which the particles are actually applied to cells is rarely reported. Some aggregation is likely to occur, and it should be expressed out that the information report in most of the studies, they relate to aqueous media, which means before the application to the cell lines. So despite these limitations, small lipid particles, this means below 100 nanometers, they seem to be well tolerated by the cells, larger than the particles with particles higher than 500 nanometers. As shown in this figure on the right-hand side, at the doses of 1 milligram per milliliter, larger particles are not that well tolerated. So you see only a few reports of particles below 100 nanometers. For smaller particles, so this means below 100 nanometers, we found no reports to increase the cell viability up to values below 50%. But we speculate that the reason is exactly the aggregation of the particles and consequently the sedimentation of the particles in the cell culture. The selection of the appropriate surfactant is also crucial for the long-term stability of lipid nanoparticles and also for their biocompatibility. Poloxamers and mostly, let's say, Poloxamer 188 dominate by far the selection of surfactants for lipid nanoparticles. 280 is also used in marketed products for topical and for intravenous administration, and is allowed for direct administration, direct addition into food in reasonable amounts. Poloxamer 188 is recommended for use in dermal and in oral, liquid, and semi-solid formulations. And less frequently used surfactants are in the great majority already used in market products, but they are less The majority is all recommended for topical and less for parenteral administration. So the effect of surfactants on the compatibility of lipid nanoparticles with cells in culture should be the most critical factor, because typically the mass ratio for surfactants to total of lipids in lipid particles vary greatly. You see here the range. Sometimes it is necessary to include a higher quantity of surfactants, especially when formulation goal is to obtain the lowest particle size as possible. And a good example is the ultra small NLC, typically containing 3 to 4 surfactants of oil in water or water in oil types, but using a higher number of surfactants increases the complexity of the formulation. It is much more difficult for scaling up the process. Considering the quantity or the amount of SLN used in vitro studies, they vary between 10 microgram per milliliter and 1 milligram per milliliter. This means that the amount of surfactant concentration applied to the cells can be present in concentrations between 1 microgram to 0.5 milligram per milliliter or even more in cell lines. So combination of surfactants is often necessary in order to ensure good stabilization, ensure the good stabilization, and they are frequently by both electrostatic and static repulsion between the individual particles. But it is shown in this figure here. The cells are especially sensitive to combination of surfactants. We can see here cell viability below 50%. The majority of reports make use of a combination of surfactants rather than poloxamers and polysorbates, with the lowest bioavailability outcomes. Surfactants may also influence the effect of SLN on the cell viability over the time of exposure. There is evidence that surfactants, especially cationic compounds, they desorb from the surface of SLN during storage, and this is reflected by the changes, usually by the decrease of the zeta potential. And this desorption may occur also during the course of the rearrangements due to the changes of the polymorphic conformations of the particle size core. And once detached from the surface of the core, the surfactant is available for attaching to the cell membrane, and this can also increase decrease the cell viability. And the shielding effect provided by the neutral lipid is obviously lost. So many studies, they report the decrease of the cell viability, followed by an increase up to 75 hours or even longer of incubation time. And this may happen by the multiplication of the cells surviving the effect of the initial contact with the cells added to the cell culture. Some other studies report on the cell viability higher than the untreated control cells, and this may be translated as the evidence of the perfect health of the cells for testing. The question is to which extent such behavior is beneficial. Excluding cancer cells, another example that might be is the hyperproliferative keratinocyte cell lines causing psoriasis, where it is desirable that the cells receiving the treatment decrease the cell growth. We expect in this case the decrease of the cell growth inhibition. So in this study here, we see that the SLN demonstrate the capacity to decrease the excessive growth of the cell of the HACAT cell line. Recent evidence also confirm previous data that lipid nanoparticles, they do not cause genotoxicity. So the risk of DNA fractionation is also limited. In these two examples reported here, negatively charged SLN formulated were tested in adenocarcinoma human alveolar-based epithelial cell line, and the author reports absence of toxicity, cytotoxicity, and also absence of the DNA fractionation. In one of our studies, we have we have used cationic SLN. Then, despite the overall cell increase in the tail intensity, the over increase in the percentage of the DNA in the tail compared to the untreated cells, the differences were only significant for the for the two highest tested concentrations here in both types of cell lines using glycerol bihanat SLN, cationic glycerol bihanat SLN, either for the non-treated and FPG treated cells. The genotoxicity. So these results were also consistent with the cell viability at the same time point of 24 hours. I don't know if we can see here. At the same treatment of 1 milligram per milliliter, showing a drastic decrease in the cell viability. So it is important to note that the only positive result observed for genotoxicity occurred at a dose that was already identified as cytotoxic. So this means that the reason for detecting the amount of DNA in the comet tail may be related to processes besides the DNA damage, mostly likely the cell necrosis or cell apoptosis. So this conclusion is in line with other reports on the genotoxicity testing by COMET assay with lipid nanoparticle carriers. This one was oligofectamine formulated in liposomes, a commercially available transfection region forming cationic liposomes. They also cause no DNA damage. Most to this, so the cell line here was a typical adenocarcinoma cell line. So a way to summarize these results, we can highlight that the maximum concentration of lipid particles that cells in culture can tolerate varies from formulation to formulation, owing to the different lipids and also to the different surfactants used, but generally they can be found between 0.1 and 1 milligram per milliliter. Neutral lipids, neutral solid lipids, as happens in case of mono D and 3-glycerides, they do not show any mutagenic potential, and the same holds true for the most of the surfactants used, which are polopsomers and twin 80. Most of the twins, but mainly twin 80. The mechanism of toxicity of cationic lipids and cationic surfactants is mainly related to their interactions with the cell membrane and with the risk of disruption of the cell membrane. And this effect is more pronounced with a single chain cationic lipids and surfactants. We can see, for example, based on the membrane integrity by the release of the lactate dehydrogenase, and the assays are mostly the Alamar assay and the MTT assay. Neither solid lipids nor the polymeric or endophilic surfactants per se, they should be the cause of the observed toxic and genotoxic effects. In this study, for example, the authors use a more sensitive and standardized COMET assay method, where isolated cell nuclei are imbibed in the agarose gel and subject to electrophoresis. No increase in the percentage of tail intensity was seen when the particles, when the cells were treated with coenzyme Q10-free NLC, so blank NLC in human dermal fibroblastos. The additional detection of purine bases, oxidative stress, oxidative damage was also found levels similar to those for the untreated cells. Interesting was to see that the DNA damage increased with the treatment UVA irradiation cells, but the increase was practically the same in the untreated and the treated cells with NLC. One reported case of DNA damage comes from a paper on acetylcholinesterase containing SLN, which caused an increase in comet formation. We see here the photographic illustrations after 48 hours incubation. Free drug caused similar increase itself. NLC encapsulated drug further increased the DNA damage, but the concentration selected for genotoxicity, the drug and the drug-loaded NLC already caused decrease in cell viability. So whether it is the SLN or not remains questionable. The hemolysis assay is another assay that is commonly used in SLN and NLC formulations to check the safety profile. And the hemolysis indicates the capacity of interaction with the cell membrane to an extent that leads to its destruction also. So recent reports on the SLN and NLC are also very favorable. In this study, for example, tamoxifen was formulated in SLN, composed of a glycerol monostearate and twin-80, frequently formulated in SLN formulation, frequently and exactly in the combination reported in this study. The authors reported limited hemolysis even at concentrations as high as 1 milligram per milliliter. The test was done with excess of the nanoparticles in red blood cells. Hyaluronic coated SLN containing chemotherapeutic drug irinotecan here also show low hemolysis activity, even if the formulation contained cationic compound, even sterilamine, for example. Another cationic SLN formulation containing doxorubicin here was successfully in decreasing the hemolysis observed after the exposure to doxorubicin solution, and this effect was even further pronounced when the SLN was coated with galactose. In one of our previous surveys, we have raised a concern about contradicting results with regard to oxidative stress induction. Further research was conducted, and nowadays more data are available, pointing out the possibility that lipid nanoparticles do influence the oxidative stress of the cells. We have observed several increase in the cellular defense mechanisms using against oxidative stress in Hep2 cells exposed to cationic SLN. In this specific case, the reason can be found, so it's the same as the SLN reported in one of, or shown in one of the previous slides. So these cationic nanoparticles are composed of cetal, the cationic surfactant known to induce oxidative damage. In order to limit this severe oxidative stress induction, the inclusion of an antioxidant active ingredient might be a solution. And we have applied this principle for the encapsulation of curcumin in a concentration at which the compound exhibits its antioxidant effect. And we have indeed seen the potential increase on the cell viability when using curcumin in our cationic lipid nanoparticles. We have improved, in fact, the cell viability, but not as much as the curcumin alone, as we see here. This last column in all of the profiles, when the curcumin solution was in the SO at the same dose. Similarly, idibidone loaded NLC was tested in a keratinocyte cell line, showing almost 100% of cell viability with increased concentrations of NLC. But the viability dropped down to 80%. The corresponding concentrations of the idibidone concentration drug. So in this case, the NLC formulated were formulated from safe materials like hard fats, in a combination with surfactants that are currently being used in dermal formulations, like Care, for example. With respect to the in vivo preclinical data on safety, we have identified 104 studies, from which 42 did not contain in vivo data nor other relevant data for in vivo toxicity, out of which 32 report on SLN quality and in vivo safety. Most of them include pharmacokinetic and biodistribution. Nowadays, more data are available on the animal safety, health, and adverse effects. Only few reports provide information on the formulations that tested for oral, parenteral, and intratracheal administration, almost exclusively in rodent model. Only one we found reporting information on legal dogs without the appearance of adverse effects. What's important here is to highlight that most of the studies report data on biochemical, hematological, and hematological parameters, yes. A slight different situation is observed when we study about SLN intended for dermal administration. So since the very beginning of the research on lipid nanoparticles, excipients already in use in topical formulations were selected for the production of these types of particles. Various studies on skin compatibility and on no irritation profile were conducted in animals and also in human volunteers. And when screening the literature, most prominent in vivo testing used for skin irritation analysis of lipid nanoparticles, they include episkin and epiderm tests. Only few others use in vivo use cell lines for cytotoxicity, and cell lines, most of them are the human keratinocyte cell line and also the mouse embryo fibroblast cell line. So the majority of cell viability studies on SLN for dermal application are performed using the MTT and the Alamar Blue assay as endpoints. Among the various factors contributing to the skin irritation profile of lipid nanoparticles, active ingredients may, in fact, be extremely disruptive to the skin. There is a range of drugs formulated in SLN and NLC formulations for topical administration. Several studies have specifically investigated the performance of lipid nanoparticles containing active ingredients causing skin irritation. The general observation of them within extensive research work have been provided that controlled drug delivery systems like lipid nanoparticles can be formulated as a promising alternative to overcome the cutaneous adverse effects induced by active ingredients. And in fact, we see significantly lower, reduced skin irritation, absence of erythema, absence of irritation, no significant irritation. So this is the outcome, the most commonly reported outcome. So the proposed mechanisms for the reduction of the skin irritation comprise the controlled drug release, allowing for a gradual drug release and avoiding the building up of high drug concentrations at the skin that could impose the skin irritation. Also, the increased drug deposition into the pilus sebaceous unit, which ultimately reduces the dose frequency and adverse topical effects. And in addition, the reinforcement and the repair of the stratum corneum lipid film and the increase in the skin irritation by the creation of the protective film, lipid film, on the skin upon dermal application of the skin of the lipid nanoparticles that can reduce or can prevent the skin irritation as well. So this is another example, a typical example, endless number of reports that several research groups have been involved in the formulation and in the characterization of lipid nanoparticles formulations for potential thermal delivery of retinoids. Retinoids, they encompass a multitude of physiological effects and show they promise in the treatment of rare skin diseases, psoriasis, acne, photoaging, epithelial skin cancer, and topical use of retinoids is, however, followed by high incidence of side effects, erythema, peeling, burning, scaling, and this is attributed to the presence of the acidic function in the molecule of retinoids. But it is assumed that the encapsulation of such molecules into lipid nanoparticles, they would reduce the contact of the acidic function with the stratum corneum, reducing the risk of erythematic episodes. Using the Drase test in rabbit, this study showed that non-encapsulation of tretinoid in SLN resulted in significantly less skin irritation and higher skin tolerance, better skin tolerance, when compared the SLN formulation with the marketed cream. So this is the marketed cream and the SLN formulation. So interesting was also to see that the decrease in skin irritation was not related to the decrease in skin permeation. So this means that the active substance can penetrate the skin together with lipid nanoparticles. So irritation was decreased, but not but the skin permeation was not decreased. So the tretinoid loaded SLN produced from natural lipid nanoparticles produced from natural solid lipids by a simple emulsion technique incorporated into a gel. These examples here, without retinoin and with tretinoin. They were evaluated compared with a marketed formulation. With respect to the primary skin irritation using the Drase test patch on rabbits. So the skin irritation studies indicated that the SLN-based tretinoin gels resulted in considerable less irritation. We can compare here the SLN-based gel and the marketed formulation. As compared to the marketed formulation, the cumulative tretinoin permeated was higher with the SLN in compared to the marketed formulation, but with a less irritation profile. Yes, with a less irritation profile, as we see here. So the irritation did not occur even after 72 hours in case of the SLN-based tretinoid gels, where the marketed formulation showed a well-defined erythema 72 hours, which eventually increased with the scaling up to ending up to 5 days. So the SLN-based gels demonstrated a remarkable advantage over the marketed formulation with improving the skin tolerability of tretinoin, indicating their potential for improving the patient's compliance. So in one of our studies, we have compared the potential for cutaneous damage following the dermal application of retinol palmitate loaded SLN, liposomes, and in nano emulsions. V is the ethanolic solution, C is the result from the contact with the retinoid loaded nanoemulsion, the D is the SLN, and the E is the liposomes. Yes. So we found that the SLN and the liposomes, and we can compare here, were the systems that disrupted the skin in the lowest extent in comparison to the emulsion and obviously to the ethanolic solution. So according to the permeation studies, the nanoemulsions offered a statistically significantly higher retinol permeation through human skin, but we hypothesized that the high influx induced higher skin irritation or sensitization, causing damage and reduction of the skin barrier function, which was not the case of the SLN here. Now about the ocular administration, ocular route. So topical drug delivery into the eyes is by far the most common and well tolerated accepted route for topical for administration of drugs for the treatment of various eyes diseases. The so the lipid nanoparticles, they have gained interest in recent years as drug carriers for ocular delivery because of their composition made by biocompatible and lipids resulting from their good safety for the ocular structures, and also from their good penetration and permeation and sustained drug release properties onto the ocular mucosa, allowing the drug reaching both the anterior and the posterior segments of the eye. However, the lipid nanoparticles, they have to meet the same demands as the other aqueous formulations for ocular applications. So these requirements are the biocompatibility, the sterility, the isotonicity, the pH preferentially between 7 and 9, and small particle size preferentially below 90 micrometers for eye drops and for suspensions. The biocompatibility of the formulations aimed for ocular administration serves as an indication of the interaction between the cells and the carriers. And this confirms that the carrier may not induce direct or indirect injury to the corneal tissues. This means we should evaluate the inflammation, immunological, and systemic effects, and also should not induce or delay any adverse effect. The currently validated in vitro test method for the evaluation of eye irritation is recommended by the European Union Reference Laboratory for alternatives to animal tests, includes a set of alternatives. And these alternatives we have seen already, so the red blood cell hemolysis, the neutral red release or fluorescent leakage, and also the bovine corneal opacity and the permeability test, also the Hank egg coral line-like membrane test, and the ex vivo tests of the isolated rabbit eye and on isolated chicken eye. An overview of lipid nanoparticles formulated intended for ocular delivery is presented here in this table. Although the lipid matrix employed in SLN and NLC is usually a physiological lipid with low toxicity and low chronic toxicity, acute and chronic toxicity, the potential ophthalmic tolerability of lipid nanoparticles must be assessed via toxicity studies caused by the presence of the surfactants. And again, the most commonly used surfactants should be quinate and poloxamers. This study translates the evaluation of the ocular tolerability of SLN produced using dunazine 114, so trimidistin, as lipid matrix, and variable concentrations of the most commonly used surfactants found in the literature for analogous systems. So to quantify the potential ocular irritation profile or damage effect of the SLN formulations, the parameters are commonly used. That are commonly used are congestions, the swelling, the discharge of the conjunctiva, iris hyperemia, and corneal opacity. And this study reports on the use of the bracer test. So the authors found that the SLN stabilized with colifor 188, so this is poloxamer 188, show no irritation profile on the ocular surface to the highest tested concentration, which was 0.4% of surfactants. Another study using quinate and poloxamer 188, these surfactants were used to stabilize glycerol bayonet SLN nanoparticles. They were also found to be safe using brace tests as well. They were found to be tased on the tissues at the concentrations between 0.1 and 0.4%. We have tested the ocular toxicity of a series of lipid nanoparticles made using different lipids and using different surfactants, most of them, again, twin-80 and poloxamide 188 in different occasions, and for each the mean total score should be 0, with translating no signs of irritation. The surfactant composition of colloidal systems may affect its affinity to the ocular mucosa. The positive charge was found to have a significant effect on the cell viability, but increasing the surface residence of the nanoparticles onto the ocular mucosa. Positively charged lipid nanoparticles are expected to increase the corneal absorption of drugs by increasing the residence time because of these ionic interactions. We have developed and characterized the cationic lipid nanoparticles employing different concentrations of stab and evaluated their toxicity using the Y79 cell lines. So this is a retinoblastoma cell line. And with increasing concentrations of CTAP, we have seen already these results. Increasing these concentrations, the concentration of CTAP and the content of CTAP stabilized lipid nanoparticles in the formulation, the cell viability decreased, suggesting that safe and biocompatibility systems should contain a maximum of 0.5% of CTAP. To finalize this topic, here is a summary of in vivo studies of SLN tested for ocular administration, and in most of the cases we see the use of New Zealand albino rabbits as the model of choice. An overview of, for most of the drugs, so this is the common model, in vivo model, animal model. An overview of the formulations intended for oral administration is presented here in this table. From these 5 reports, 2 of them show adverse effects, but although these findings may sound discouraging, when we better look at the outcomes reveal that the reports on the hematological adverse effects were related to the drug itself and not to the nanoparticles themselves. For example, an increase in tamoxifen dose further decreased the counter of the erythrocytes and the leukocytes. And because the tested biochemical parameters remained normal. So we were indeed dependent on the drug. I will skip this one. What I wanted to show is that I'm running out of time. I think this this result is the elephant dream. The authors reported hepatitis and leukocyte infiltration in urine, liver, similar to that observed also for the drug itself. And here nanoparticles could not prevent the effect of the drug. I will skip these just to summarize some of the outcomes on the parenteral in vivo parenteral results. The parenteral formulations, they need to be free from particles visible to the naked eye, but a deep discussion is ongoing on whether the acceptable limits of solid particle size below 50 micron, 25 micron, or 10 micron, but there is in fact no detailed regulation about the particle size below 1 micrometer. SLN and NLC typically show intensity, weight, average diameter well below 1 micron, sometimes even below 200 nanometers, but they also tend to aggregate with the time, especially when exposed to environments with high ionic strengths. and also with high proteins, as happens when we think about in vitro results. Studies, let's say. From the 20 reports that we have studied on acute toxicity, formulations of toxicity of Sln and Nlp formulations in laboratory animals, only 15 report, most of them report no alterations, no toxic effects, no acute systemic effect on the outcome. So this is most of the results. No changes in the body weight, no toxic effects, no damage. Obviously, most of we have to ensure that the results are obviously concentration dependent outcomes. And many of the studies report, so this is also no damage, no signs of cell toxic on the cell counting. Most of the results report on the delivery of anti-cancer drugs. Experimental tumor-bearing mice receiving anti-cancer drug containing SLN by the intravenous route was reported several times to be less impact by the drug, especially in terms of normal activity. And most of the studies also report that the weight gain, let's say that in this case, the weight loss typically observed in mice receiving anti-cancer drugs was less pronounced when using the nanoparticles. So the results in you, and I think I'm running out of time. So thank you very much once again. And this is the typical, this is the picture of my university. You are very welcome. And in case if you have this is a mistake here, if you want to contact me in the future, here you have my email. And I'm free if you have any questions, please.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh, on Corona.
Hello, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes.
Please do have any questions, so please get them clear. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. One question is, what studies are to be performed to establish the safety of a new lipid in SLN for tropical application?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? I think I didn't understand.
Okay. What studies are to be performed to establish the safety of a new lipid in SLN for tropical application?
Well, typically the results. I mean, the reports that we've seen. We usually recommend the use of several in vitro models of synthetic in vitro models, and also well, after screening the safety profile, going into the in vivo models. Usually the in vivo models, as it is for topical administration, their mice and also the humans, in the human volunteers. I don't know if, can you hear me properly?
Yeah, we can hear you. Hello. Yes, ma'am, we can hear you properly.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can, next question, shall I ask?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Which type of lipids are to be used for the ocular drug delivery of SLN and NLCs?
Yeah, usually, most of the commonly used lipids, they have a safety profile, and if they are accepted for parenteral administration, they could also be used for ocular administration. But when we think about either for topical and for ocular administration, more important than the type of lipid is the surfactant and its concentration. So usually any acylglycerol can commonly be used for topical, for ocular administration. including glycerol bihanaat, glycerol, so the stearic acid, glycerol stearate, glycerol bihanaat. So all of these lipids can be used for ocular administration, but again, more important than the type of lipid is the surfactant. The surfactant is most crucial because this is the surfactant who will or which will induce some risk of toxicity besides the size, besides the mean particle size and the polydispersity.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Next, ma'am. Uh, is there any possibility of lipids degradation during preparation of SLN? In case degradation is possible, then how to prevent it?
Well, that it will depend on the type of degradation. Usually, well, if there is some risk of oxidation, then the best approach is to use an antioxidant to avoid the degradation. But then we will have to think about what kind of lipid we are talking about, what kind of lipid we are using. It's better to use to avoid lipids that suffer lipid peroxidation, let's say, sensitive lipids with a risk of peroxidation. So it's better, they usually could be, so they should be avoided. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but this is a very general question. More concrete examples should be given to understand what kind of lipid we are talking about.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. One more question, ma'am. Basic difference between SLN and NLC we should keep in mind while formulating.
What is, sorry, again?
Yeah, basic difference between SLN and NLC we should keep in mind while formulating.
What we should keep in mind when we develop SLN and NLC?
Basic difference between SLN and NLC.
Yeah, SLN, you use only one kind of lipid, and usually a lipid that solidifies at so it has a melting point above 40 centigrades. In the NLC, usually combine solid lipids with liquid lipids. Even if the mixture melts above the same constant, above 40 degrees, the main difference is actually in NLC you have a combination of different lipids, and this combination reduces the risk of polymorphic changes over shelf life.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for having your time.
Thank you.
For bearing with us.
Thank
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you,
Bye
Dr.
bye.
Elena. Thank you so much for your.
Hello. So participants, rest of your queries will be will get you cleared through mail only. So you can send your queries, whatever your queries do you have, you can mail us. Then we'll get your them cleared. So now our next speaker is Dr. Parijat Jain, who would be conducting the session and enlightening us on the topic artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analytics in pharmaceuticals. He is serving as director, head strategic business relationship, bioscience, Lonza, Vaucasville, USA. He is an accomplished pharmaceutical professional with exhaustive global multifunctional managerial experience and significant contributions towards the pharmaceutical and biotechnology field spanning over 2 decades in the areas of strategy, business management, marketing, operations, as well as formulation science. He holds MS, PhD, and MBA degrees and is having experience over a decade of pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry include Novartis, Teva, and Lonza. So, hello, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. You
Uh,
please go. I request you to go ahead with your technical session.
all right. Can you see my screen? I am just sharing it.
Yeah. Yes. Slide.
1 second. All right. Can you see my screen?
No, sir. We can't see.
Excellent. 1 second. Right now, let me know if you can see my screen. I Now it should be
Yes.
visible, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir.
All right. Excellent. And now let me just do one more thing. Let's go on the full screen mode.
Sure.
And then let me switch the deck. All right. So now you guys can see it, right?
Yeah, perfect, sir. Perfect.
All right. Excellent. Everything is good. So let's get started. I'm actually short on time, so my apologies up front. I'm also recording my session over here, but I do have a meeting. It's quite early up in the morning over here. Let me know if so I cannot see you guys, right? And when I speak, obviously, unless and until you interrupt, I would not know. So in case there is any break in the network or you guys are not able to see or hear me, just let me know. Right? Just prompt me.
Sure, sure, sure.
Excellent. So again, thank you for the opportunity over here. Good evening, everyone. Uh, Today, I'm going to talk about this artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analytics in pharmaceuticals. Overall, before I start, I just want to mention Nilesh. He had reached out to me about 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago, maybe last month, I believe, end of last month, and he proposed this topic. Now, obviously, I'm not a professional in this, and I'll quickly share my background over here. I think it was just introduced earlier, but the reason I chose to speak on this only because it also helps me learn, and this is something which is not even future; it's almost present, right? So it's always good to be in the know and always be in the current as well, right? So I hope my objective, my aim is that you get some buzzwords out of this presentation. Clearly we are not the data scientists, we are not in IT field, but still knowing about this and the applications in pharmaceuticals is really going to help you all go a long way in your careers, especially in pharmaceuticals as well. Right. So with that, let me just get started. Also think of this as a journey, right? So I'll go back, a few billion years ago, and then we'll come to the current state of affairs in terms of technology, and then I'll go in detail about the applications, etc. Right. So I'm presuming that the way it works is that I'll do the presentation, and if there is time left and if there are questions, you guys can ask. Otherwise, certainly you can email me later on, right? So let's get started. I was introduced already, so I'll move on. I just want to quickly mention I'm an alumni of Sagar University, and I did my bachelor's there. Moved to United States about 20 years ago, and since then I've been here, and currently I work for Lonza. So I also need to read this out because I'm required to as an employee. So here's a disclaimer for legal reasons. This presentation is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace independent professional judgment. The statements and opinions expressed in this presentation and on the following slides are solely those of the presenter, which is me, independent of the corporation, which is Lonza, that the presenter is employed with. All right. So with that, as I mentioned earlier, it's take it as a journey, and overall think about it as hopefully if you can get 2, 3, 4, 5 points, and then hopefully it helps you in your career as well, right? So we start with the technological evolution. What is the market? How does the players look like in this area? The pharmaceutical applications, which is, I'm assuming that this is the core that you guys would want to understand, and then the data science piece, right? And then we conclude. So moving on to the next, or rather the first session, which is technological evolution. Now, this is a figure which is close to my heart, and I apologize if you are not able to read the font, right? If it's a bit small, but I'll just walk you through, right? And what this tells is the accelerating pace of change, right? In terms of, if we start from, you know what, I took a liberty of adding a few more figures over here. So let me just do this. And now, so now you can see the rest of the years, right? So human genome sequence was sequenced in 2003, right? That was the first time that we could actually map out the whole human genome. And prior to that, right, 9 years ago, there was the World Wide Web that was introduced, right? 22 years prior to that was moon landing. You go on, electricity or light bulb was introduced in 1880s. Industrial Revolution began in 1760s, right? So you can just see last 100 years from the industry, from the Industrial Revolution, which is roughly about 250 years, roughly, right, where we have reached. But then you got to realize, how the curve has moved, right? Uh, and I'm in general a history buff. I do like to follow up, the history in general. So, if you have read about it, there were three revolutions, right? Industrial Revolution, Agricultural Revolution, and Cognitive Revolution, right? Both of these are obvious. But then when you go back to cognitive revolution, that is, when you talk about the religions being introduced, the gods, the myths, so on and so forth, right? The storytelling, that was the cognitive revolution. That was 70,000 years ago. And Homo sapiens came 200,000, 300,000, when the fire was introduced by Neanderthals. We were not even Homo sapiens at that point. And then prior to that, you can keep on going back to when the life originated. Biology as it stands, right, is 3.8 billion years, and then go on, so forth with energy matter. But why am I saying this, right? You'd be wondering, is because it's important to understand where we're coming from, right? And when we say that, hey, you know what, my internet is not connecting today, right, or it's really slow, you got to understand the pace at which things are moving, right? And the way it's moving in last 120 years, if you look at this timeline, when the computers started, it was called an analytical engine. In fact, the first one was called Hollerith tabulator, right? And then eventually, as it kept on going on, increasing processing speeds, communication speeds, data speeds, storage capacities, etc. This is where we are today. But what this figure tells you is that, in next 20, 25, 30 years time, we would reach the singularity, right? And what is singularity? So if you think about it, in 2015, right, our computers passed the brain power of a mouse, right? In 2023, you can't read this over here, but in 2023, basically, we would pass this, the brain power of a single human. But by 2045, we'll surpass, the brain power of all the humans combined, right? That is super intelligence that we talk about, or the intelligence explosion as we talk about, right? Pretty interesting stuff, right? And I mean, I'm not going to get into the details now, but if someone plays chess, for example, you should read about Alpha Zero, right, which defeated its previous versions and the other versions in the market. So it's a software, right, which plays chess. It's a computer. You can call it a supercomputer, obviously, and it taught itself, right? It taught itself. The machine taught itself. That's where the machine learning part comes in, and it pretty much defeated the latest version so it taught itself in 24 hours. In 24 hours, it taught itself right from not knowing anything up to actually defeating the next best available in the world. So that's the kind of pace that we're talking about, right? There are quite a few examples, but I'll probably speak as we move along. All right, so the next one is industrial revolution and the artificial intelligence. So let's say we started from the life going to the technology evolution, and then we talk about the industrial revolution and how we come to the AI. So the four industrial revolutions you should be aware of if you're not already. Mechanical, where the first one, where we had in the steam, the water discoveries, and the loom, for example, right? The electricity, the bulb, etc. Was the second industrial revolution. It was called computers. Of course, the internet, which is now current, right? So that's where we are currently, industry revolution 4. And then the fifth one, is in the future, which we talk about, cooperation between man and machine, the synergistic approach that we would adopt, which we are already seeing in quite a few instances. But this is where we are. So the bottom curve actually shows you the growth, and this is where we are currently, where artificial intelligence, we talk about Internet of Things, which is IoTs, robotics, blockchains. If you haven't heard of, you should have heard of Bitcoin, for example, right? There are other cryptocurrencies which work on those algorithms. So that's there. Quantum computing is there, which actually takes or adapts the principles of quantum mechanics from physics, and then uses them. So maybe just to give a very brief picture, typically the world of computers, it works between 1 and 0, right, which is the binary. But in quantum, it's not either or, it could be a combination of both, right? And both of them can coexist at the same time, which means that, let's say you're going from 2D version to a 3D version to a 4D version, where suddenly your possibilities grow immensely, right? So with that, talking about and continuing into this area of current artificial intelligence, or Industry Revolution 4.0, a few of these laws that really intrigue me, and it's something that's good to realize, right? And these are actually, the numbers are changing and improving by the day. But what you learn over here is Moore's law, right? Where processing speed, it says, would double every 18 months, right? Butter's law suggests that data communication speed would double every 9 months. And the storage capacity, according to Kreider's law, would double every 13 months. And I think this figure has now changed to about 8 months or 9 months as well. So the point being that, at 6 months, a year's time, the technology obviously, changes, and it really gets old very, very quickly. As a result, we got to keep pace with all that's going around. And I'll share all the applications that we come to pharmaceuticals. So, just bear with me for a moment. And this all leads to artificial intelligence. I think the best way to explain, it's artificial and it's intelligence, right? Something that intelligence obviously comes from humans, but we create those programs, those languages, those algorithms to make it artificial, put it in a machine, and then reap the benefits. So again, I'll read this out. Systems that are able to function with a degree of autonomy, and autonomy is it again, when I say degree, it means that it could be fully autonomous, or it could be with the help of other parameters, including humans for that matter. And it's iterative, and it optimizes itself, right? So before getting into the bits and the bytes over here, let me just quickly ask, are you guys able to hear me properly and see the presentation as well?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Sir.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. I hope this is exciting for you guys and it's not boring, because this is, I am maybe I'll just take a quick snip over here. But I grew in this field in pharmaceuticals, from injectables and parenterals, right? Solubility, etc., was my expert area, right? I did some predictive modeling, so on and so forth, PKPD and all that. And then, I moved into tablets and capsules, right? Solids and stuff. And then from there, operations, marketing, and so on and so forth. But this is very different, right? And this is exactly why I wanted to do this, because typically we hear about all these drug delivery systems and tablets and capsules and so on and so forth, right? Basically all that goes around the nanoparticles and stuff, but the liposomes, etc., right? But this is very exciting for me, because this is something which is not in our genre of daily life. So I hope you're gaining something out of it. And I'll tie the things up with our field as well. All right, so understanding the terms. Now let's get into the bits and the bytes. And again, just like if you own a smartphone, you don't need to know what goes in the smartphone, right? You don't need to know the chips or how the transistors or resistors are connected, how the program works and all that. As long as you're able to call, as long as you're able to open your website, you're fine, right? Or maybe these days WhatsApp, Twitter, social media, etc. So exactly in that sense, I want to give you a feel of the terms over here, and we will not obviously get into the bits and the bytes, right, or the details or the granularity as they talk about. We leave it up to the IT guys. But it's also important to understand these words so that we do not use them, and confuse the world as well. Uh, Use them unknowingly is what I meant. All right, so artificial learning is, well, actually, I'll take a step back. So there is big data. Big data is something where all the data that exists in the world, right, a lot of data, large amounts of data, and that's why it's called big data, right? In the clouds, in the servers, so on and so forth, right? Then comes artificial intelligence. And subpart of machine learning is deep learning, right? So deep learning is much more detailed and refined. It really uses the artificial neural networks. Maybe I'll speak on it in a bit. There is machine learning, and then there is artificial intelligence, right? So if we start from the broadest term, this is really where humans teach the machines, and for example, if this, then that. So if you do this, then spit out this result, right? So when, for example, smart email, I was not going to include the examples over here, but then in the end, I decided to add it because I think this will make things a bit more clear for you. So this is where the machine itself does not do any process. I mean, any learning by itself, right? This is where humans are telling them what to do, and they do it, right? So, for example, smart email characterization or categorization, right, where you give a command, or like, for example, macros in Excel. If someone has used Microsoft Excel, right, or in Outlook, if you use it, you can give a command saying that, hey, what, emails from so and so person or from so and so department, whatever, goes in this folder, and it automatically keeps on doing it, right? That's something where you give a command and it would keep on following the rule. Amazon purchase prediction, right? So Amazon, or I'm not sure what's in India, but I'm just trying to remember the term. What is, starts with an F, right? The equivalent of Amazon. But basically, it would predict the purchase. Uh,
Flipkart.
Flipkart, thank you. Thank you. Flipkart, right? So, it would just predict your patterns, and it would start saying that, hey, you know what? Okay, now that you searched for this, maybe you need this, right? And so on, right? Disease diagnosis is another key one in our area, where, for example, if there is, let's say, if you tell the program or the app that, hey, you know what, is the temperature over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Or if yes or no. If it is yes, then is there a bacterial infection? If it is a bacterial infection, then you suggest or recommend antibiotics, for example. Or if it's not bacterial infection, then you can just ask them to relax and maybe take some fluids and whatnot, right? But if there is the temperature is not as high, then of course you can suggest Advil or ibuprofen or whatever works, right? NSAIDs and something, and then rest. So again, those are some of the applications. Machine learning is something where you are enabling the machine, right? So you are basically, the machines are learning or teaching themselves. So, for example, the Facebook facial recognition, which is the tagging, right? So you see all these pictures, and suddenly it starts to prompt you that, hey, you know what, this person, do you want to tag this person because we think that this is who it is, right? Which is also used in a lot of criminal cases these days and whatnot. Netflix video recommendation is another one. And then comes the deep learning part. Deep learning is really based on the artificial neural networks, networks. Where does that term come from? So it's really the neural networks, which is really from neurons, right? I mean, there are close to 100 million, or I think precisely 86 million brain cells, right, in the body, in our brains, really. And each of those, if you remember the structure of the neurons, if you studied in the past, there is axon, there is dendrites, and with those dendrites, these millions of cells, they connect through thousands of those networks, right? So suddenly it's a huge network or web that you're talking about. And if a data comes in, and then there are zillions of possibilities, and then out of which it spits out a few outcomes, that is basically what deep learning is. Of course, easier said than done, but it's based on vast amount of data, but unstructured data, right? So it can start predicting things. Self-driving cars, you've heard of Teslas and others. Speech recognition is other one. Robotics, the surgery, so on and so forth, right? So that's all that comes in deep learning. But deep learning is a part of machine learning, which is a type of an artificial intelligence, right? So overall, that's the universe of AI. And then, so from going ahead, if I talk about AI, it would include the other two. Then the next side is data science, which is, again, now you're talking about data, right? So you talk about Google, you talk about Facebook, you talk about Apple, you talk about any of these, and including in pharmaceuticals, there are quite a few partnerships that are going on with all these firms, right? Amazon has their own web services now, or the cloud computing and stuff, where the technology is meeting the pharmaceuticals, and there is a lot of data that is generated. But all data does not mean it's meaningful, right? So you got to clean it. You got to extract the right data that you need. The data quality comes into question. The governance comes into question. The management comes into question, and then eventually, you analyze it, and then get into the next part, which is the data mining. And I have a slide on data science, so I might not repeat things then, but maybe just to cover quickly, data analytics is really, this is where you must have studied statistics, right? So if I could just maybe quickly summarize the entire piece, because this is exactly data analytics, right? You have your regression, you have your correlation, you have your the R squares and the Pearson's R, and the Z test, the T tests, the chi-square tests, so on and so forth, right? You keep on going. ANOVA is there, so one way, two way, or MANOVA is what they call it, which is a multiple ANOVA. So on and so forth, right? So it's pretty much that, right? You can use softwares to run and compare data sets, and pretty much it would tell you whether there is a correlation or not, right? So, and data mining really then gets into more deep state, where it's using and discovering patterns of unstructured data, and has the uses the statistics, but also the machine learning part and the deep learning part, right? All right, so that was sort of to bring you together, and now we are going into the next step, which is the market and players. We are good. Just let me know I'm not talking.
Yes.
All right. Moving to the next section, market and players and competition. So this is where artificial intelligence market comes in. As scientists, I can assure you that a lot of these things could be boring, or maybe not of that interest to you. But I can assure you, as you move in your careers, right, these things become very important, because although science is and R&D, for that matter, right, is the driver, is the engine of the car, if you would, right? But essentially, it's the market that drives us, right? We are still, pharmaceuticals is still is a financial model, right? So the point being that these things are important. So that's why if you gauge a little bit of understanding, people who are planning to get into MBAs after your graduation, for example, and stuff, right? This is exactly how a business model, for example, goes through, or importance of market and competition, and players, etc., is quite important, right? So just we start again from the top. where the entire AI market, it's claimed, and again, this is based on various market reports. So 391 billion uh, by 2025, right? Growing at a strong CAGR, right? That's the growth rate, 46%, right? Typically, what you see is single digit to double digit growth, right? Just to give you an idea. Here, you're talking about over 40%, right? Same with medicine market, which includes the services part, right? Nursing and applications for the doctors and stuff. That is 18 billion. The AI in pharmaceuticals, still pretty decent, 5 billion. And then drug discovery, particularly, which we'll talk about, is close to 2 billion prediction. Again, growing at a very strong figure of 40% at 2025, by 2025. Right? So then from there on, let's very quickly look at this. As I said, the discovery market outlook is growing by 40%. By 2027, and this is the prediction, obviously 2020 is the estimate for this year, grows at up to 4 billion, right? So pretty hefty. The key areas over here would be that we or the trends or the drivers basically for this outlook is to reduce the cost and the time, right? And I have a slide, maybe it's the next one or one of those slides, where we talk about the entire discovery and the drug development process, right? And then why there is a need to reduce this and how that impacts the revenues. All right, so now getting into a little bit more depth, right? So big pharma investment in artificial intelligence. On the left, you see the top 10 pharma companies, right? They have partnered, right, with right, which are decently established, I would say. The orangish, light orange, if you would, or cream color, the gray areas and the light blue areas, right? These are the ones where it's target discovery focused or drug discovery focused or development focused, right? And these are the partnerships. So let's say Roche partnered with GNS, right, for drug discovery, and what they do is that they identify the biomarkers. I believe IBM Watson is the one which is really focused on the cancer, breast cancer, right? So it has a tie-up with Novartis. Same with Pfizer has a tie-up with IBM Watson as well, and of course then MIT is involved. Intel is involved. I mean, you name it, right? Atomwise, along with Merck. There's so many examples, right? Berg is the other one, and I think I have a slide which would explain a little bit in more depth about what they do and how they do it. And so on and so forth. So this is, it's not even the future, right? It is pretty much happening. If I can give you an example where QBD, you must have heard about quality by design, right? Toyota started, I believe, in late 60s, early 70s, right? And by the time it reached our industry, it was 30-40 years old, right? And we still do not have a complete implementation of it, right? So the point being that in general, pharmaceutical industry is like a dinosaur, right? Unfortunately, things take time to be adapted, things take time to be implemented, right? And obviously, because there are a lot of repercussions, because we are dealing with lives and not like an auto industry where if a car goes bad, that's sure you can replace it with something else, but if a person dies, that's obviously a big deal. But at the same time, we have been a bit archaic, I would say, and we haven't really been open to a lot of technologies, and so Novartis, for example, is leading the front, Johnson, of course, and so on and so forth. So with that, I'll move on to the next section, which is the pharmaceutical applications, and I hope this is something that would help you guys even further. Right, so this is a typical pharmaceutical business, and I'll tell why I'm calling it a business. What you see on your screen now is a typical drug discovery and development process. Right, there is let's say you start with 5,000 to anywhere from 10,000 compounds. Right, it takes about 3 to 6 years for it to get into drug discovery and cross through the preclinical. By the time it reaches preclinical, there are about 250 compounds. Obviously, these are rough numbers, right? But just to give an example, right? You get into clinical trials and you do IND submission. By that time, maybe you have 5 remaining out of those 10,000 where you started from. You go through the clinical trials 6-7 years. By the time you pass the clinical trials, the third clinical trial, essentially there is only one FDA drug that is approved, right? So just to give you an idea of the success rate or the failure rate, if you would. And this is costly, right? No wonder the costs are upwards of 1 to 2 billion, and as a result, the pricing goes high because the costs are involved. So people do question sometimes that why is the price of this one single tablet or dosage form or pill is $100, $200, whatever. But the reason is that you're looking at that one molecule, but you're not looking at the thousands of molecules that actually went into the research, right? So that's justification, and eventually you need to have all the supporting functions to actually support all that research in order to get to that one molecule or that one dosage form. So as a result, all those costs are combined, and then it's a business model, it's a profit-based model. So clearly it has to make money. Hence the pricing. But that's a discussion for a separate day. Typically, it takes over 10 to 15 years. Now you've got to think about it that the patent life of a drug is about 17 years, right? In some places you can get 20 years, 17 years, debatable, because if you introduce a life cycle management, then it can pretty much get extended. But from the time it's filed until the generics come into the play, that brand company, for example, has 17 years typically, right? Now if you have eaten up 12 to 15 years in this development and launch, then you are pretty much remaining with 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life, right? Of making money, really. So if you just understand this, that let's say, just to give a quick example and to make it easy, if a blockbuster drug makes 1.2 billion in a year, and I'm saying 1.2 billion because there are 12 months, so it's easier to divide. Every month that you get delayed, you are losing $100 million, right? Which is huge, right? $100 million a month, which is obviously depends on the disease area. I mean, if it's for a rare disease, what's the patient population? But as soon as the patent expires, generics are already waiting 6 months prior to the expiry date, and the market is flooded, the prices go down, and obviously the business loses. So in order for a brand company to regain that the investment or the return on investment, the time is the crunch, right? And that's where, if you can shorten this time period using artificial intelligence, for example, or any other means, that is huge for a pharma company, right? So just now to tie things up, why did I call it a business? Because other than this R&D and the clinicals and the PKPD folks, so on and so forth, you have supporting functions also, which are operations, supply chain, logistics, regulatory affairs, legal, finance, licensing, marketing, business development, commercial development, sales, so on and so forth, right? And the reason I put all these in the slide, because the question could be, where does artificial intelligence find its applications, right? I mean, we've spoken about all these things, but where does it find its actual application? And the answer is literally in each of those functions. I mean, legal, I'm not sure about legal. I haven't read much on that, but I'm because it's based on data as well. At some point, it should. But for the rest, everywhere in each of these terms that I've used over here, you can actually apply, and it is being applied and tested out in the field, right? So now let's get into the artificial intelligence companies across applications, right? So let's say, on the top, you see this target discovery, drug discovery, development, post-approval, right? In target discovery, it's essentially, you identify the targets where, let's say a cancer cell, has those ACE2 receptors, like, for example, example, COVID right now has that ACE2 receptors, and you can identify those biomarkers. Once you identify the target, you identify the uh, uh, you validate the target, right? Once you validate the target, you get into the drug discovery phase where you have thousands of potential candidates, which you right. We just spoke about all that, but the point is that there are all these companies that are involved in supporting this, right? There is Burge, there is Atomwise, there is Engine, there is so many of those. So over 250 startups have exist currently, which is a pretty big field, right? So now, having said that, maybe to give now a little bit perspective about uh, how do these companies function, right? And how are these applied and where is it applied, right? So for example, we talk about in silico medicine. In silico is something where you're basically there is in vivo, in the animals or in the life form, in silico, which is I'm sorry, in vivo, in vitro, which is outside of it, outside the cells, etc. And then there is in silico, which is on computers, right? So this is where, for example, companies like in silico and others come, where they support, that's as I was talking about earlier, right? They can identify the biomarkers because they have a lot of data that is fed, right? All this clinical data, all these data is actually available. Obviously, you got to pay a price for it on FDA sites or other government sites, and you can actually pull those data out. And you can, let's say it's a cancer cell, it has some receptors with the disease, a particular disease, right? And these companies, for example, they would run algorithms to figure out, hey, you know what, if it's this type of cancer, or if this type of disease, then these receptors must exist in the cells. So because that happens, if you remember your medicinal chemistry, for example, the QSAR, the quantitative structural activity relationship, where you have a structure of a molecule, and then you have various moieties, right? Of course, organic chemistry now that we're getting into, but various moieties, and each of those moieties or some of those moieties might have a biological response, right? You can pretty much modulate, right, thousands of possibilities, and essentially you can create or maybe you can call it a simulated version of a healthy cell, simulated version of the unhealthy or the diseased cell, and simulated versions of all these molecules might actually give you the response that you actually need. And then out of those thousands of possibilities that you started with, even without putting a pen to paper, right, or going into the wet labs, for example, you can already downsize to a handful of compounds, and those could be your leads. And then from there on, right, you're really focused, right? So now you can understand where this discovery piece comes and where the artificial intelligence applications comes. Same thing with Berg, for example. It uses a lot of omics data. What is omics data, you might ask? So omics is something where it's a generic term for proteomics, which is also known as transcriptomics. There is genomics, there is metabolomics, so on and so forth. So what it does is that a lot of data exists, and based on some computer models and applications and algorithms, you can actually map out. Let's say you're talking about genomics, right? So you can identify the biomarkers cytoplasm, you get into the DNA, you get into the RNA, you get into the nucleotides, right? And the four nucleotides that exist, the adenine, guanine, uracil, and cytosine, and within that, right? So those are the different possibilities of formation, right? And that is exactly it's those four nucleotides. That's it, right? And you can pretty much have multiple and thousands of permutation combinations and that is essentially what produces proteins, which essentially is responsible for anything that's happening, whether it's hormones, whether it's activity, whether it's whatever functions that a human body can do, right? So when you talk about artificial intelligence, you have all those data mapped, for example, for the genomes. And this is where you can, let's say, if you're talking about metabolomics, you have all this data set that's available that could already say that, hey, you know what, with these moieties, with this kind of a structure, these are the metabolites that might come out, right? So again, it's all based on computers and not really going into the labs, which in general you would do all these testings by testing it out in the labs, etc., right? So on and so forth, right? Atom wise, I'm not going to get into details over here, but identification, optimization, toxicity predictions, just exactly the mechanisms that I mentioned. Antidotes, for example, IBM is another one which is big on this treatment selection and outcomes, as I was mentioning about the cancer cells, etc. Anti or breast cancer rather, right? IBM has a tie-up with Novartis, as well as with Pfizer, right? And then antidote is another one. So this is an application in clinical trials now, right? So you might ask, how does it apply in clinical trials? This is where let's say you want to find out who should be included or excluded, right? When you design a clinical trial, you want, let's say, depending on phase 1, 2, 3, how many patients you're talking about, right? There is a whole patient pool. You want to maybe get them based on the demographics or based on their disease state or health state, whatever. So all those this AI can actually help you in terms of narrowing it down. And what this does is that it improves the quality, right, of patient selection. And once that happens, you can also reduce the number of patients, because now you might not need so many patients or plethora of patients. You can actually reduce it to a handful of patients, because those are the patients which have those characteristics, which is determined by your AI, right, for example. And all these algorithms or softwares which would tell you which patients go into the clinical trials. Once that happens, there are if there are less number of patients, and then comes the part of monitoring the patients, right? That is obviously a lot of expense as well. So with the monitoring piece, again, gadgets like these smartwatches, phones, wearable technology is what they call it. The doctors or the clinicians can actually monitor the patients as we go. It's real time data. It's not something which is that they have to stay in the hospitals or in a secluded area and then they are being monitored, right? This is all, it all happens real time. So it saves a lot of time, essentially. And if you go back to the whole timeline, that is one of the keys, right? Monitoring compliance, AI cure is another one, in which again, I think this is pretty obvious. It monitors the medicine ingestion via smartphone camera, so just to monitor the compliance, right, that you have actually taken it or not, or it's suggesting that or that for example, yes, you say that I did, but maybe you did not. So with that, we can come to this next slide, and this I can spend, honestly, I can spend 5 hours talking about this, but let me just make sure we are good on time. I spoke about drug discovery, so I'm not going to repeat myself. Same with clinical trials, right? We just discussed that. In terms of, again, I could have included multiple slides on each of these topics, but the problem was that it would just take an entire day to talk about it. So I just listed it over here, and let me just spend a couple of minutes to just address each of these. So we have drug discovery, we spoke about clinical trials. Now let's talk about manufacturing operations. So in manufacturing operations, how is this used? You must have heard about electronic batch records, the ERP, which is the enterprise resource planning system. It integrates pretty much everything in a business model, right? So you must have heard about, let's say, SAPs, the CRMs, right, where you log into your sales data or your clinical trial data, or your supply chain data, right? Costs and so on and so forth. So ERP can actually act as an integration system, right? Uh, which already exists in big pharma, right? So it's not something that's new anymore. In supply chain and logistics, anytime a shipment leaves your port, right, right from that point on until it is received, whether it's a temperature control, whether it's a humidity control in the trucks, whether it's the timeline, I mean, anything and everything gets logged in and it is observed real time. I can give you some examples. When I used to work for Novartis, we were this was in East Hanover, in New Jersey, and we were making some batches in Switzerland, right? Near Visp, actually, in one of our facilities. And over there, so over here, we are sitting and monitoring, with the advent of QBD and the design space and the high level and the lower levels and whatnot, uh, you can pretty much have identified your critical process parameters, right? And then once you have those that range and levels, you can pretty much monitor it anywhere, right? As long as there is internet, you can pretty much monitor, how many tablets are coming out, what's the let's say if you're using a bed granulation technology, how much water is being added, what's the mixing time, so on and so forth, right? How much drying time and so on. And if there is a deviation, so let's say if you create a threshold, and then anything that falls within those thresholds, everything is good and hunky dory. But if by any means, if it goes beyond those two lines, right, then suddenly the system alerts you, and at that same time you can understand that, hey, you know what, there is something wrong. So point being that this is all possible because of algorithms and the models that are being created. But the key is, and maybe I'll talk about that in the last slide that I have after this. In marketing, for example, you may ask, how is it applied in marketing? Marketing, you might have heard about this classical case of the milk, where if you go to a grocery store, why are the milk, for example, generally, not always, but generally it's put towards the end of the grocery store. There was this whole prediction analysis that was done, study that was conducted, and they realized that, hey, you know what, in order to milk is something that people would go and buy quite often, right, on a daily or such basis. And not just milk, right? You can take any commodity product, and they would have to pass through the aisle, right? And once they pass through it, they might pick up some more random stuff on the way. So there is another one, very interesting one, where, and it's a classic one actually, if anyone has studied marketing, there is this diaper versus the beer, right? So the study was conducted on individuals, or males of 30 to 40 years of age, where when they had the kids, they would go to these grocery shops, and they were buying beers, but they had come to actually buy the diapers, right? So when they realized this, they started to put the beers right next to the diaper, or at least in the same aisle, and the sales went up by 38% or so, right? I mean, just some random figures, but the point being that you could use this prediction, right, for anything. Same in business development, where you're talking about valuating a company, right? Let's say you're talking about mergers and acquisitions. You need to understand the pipeline, the drug pipeline of the company that you're interested in. Of course, then there are other companies who might also be interested. So the time becomes a key part over here, where let's say I'm a diabetic, a company that has some diabetic products, right? So then I do have a better understanding of that area, but not of something else. Or humans might in general, move around. They might be from other company, and they might have some bias associated with it. But with algorithms and others, right, there is no bias. Ideally, there should not be, because it's really based on the data. So with that, when you're looking at the clinical performance, you can look at the history and the past, and you can predict. Essentially, that's what prediction is, right? Or forecasting of how this business might perform. Should we buy it or should we not buy it? And hence the proposals go forth and stuff. Licensing similarly, on that front as well. In regulatory affairs, this is also interesting. There is something called uh, uh, I think it's natural language program, NLP, where these algorithms can actually reach the CMC documents, right? So it helps in terms of sifting through or extracting data from a lot of different existing documents, and helps in reviewing times, right, for the regulators basically. Same with medication management and precision medicine. I just spoke about it. This is where you can talk about compliance, whether the pill was taken or not, so on and so forth. These days, if you think about it, Amazon or maybe Flipkart, I'm not sure if they do this or not, but when they deliver, they take a picture, right? That they've delivered the box, in front of your door, and pretty much anyone can, that we have done this, right? So that's something where it's same logic applies, where, hey, I've taken this pill, here's a video or a snapshot, and so on. Or you can monitor your blood pressure and so on. So, Fitbits and all that, right? They all help over there. Radiological imaging is again one which is proven now, where when you talk about tumors on the scans, on the CT scans, the algorithms are better compared to the actual radiologists in determining whether it's benign or malignant tumor, right? But the point is that over here, sometimes when you talk about deep learning, because the system is learning itself, it might suggest that it's benign, but there is a possibility, right? There is always an element of error where it might turn out to be malignant, and that's where that's the cost sometimes when you work with deep learning, and that's why it's important to understand when to use which technology, because you might be doing this at a cost of accuracy, right? It's almost unknown. That's why. So disease diagnosis, we spoke about it. Where am I now? Let me just see. Virtual nurses and digital consultation. This is, I think, pretty prevalent now, especially with the current situation that the entire world is in. You can call in, or have a video conference and pretty much get some consultation. Managing medical records and data keeping is another one where I think that's pretty obvious. Gene therapy is another one. I maybe alluded a little bit when I was talking about genomics, but basically, I've worked in this area as well. And in gene therapy, for example, you get the genome of a disease cell and the genome of a healthy cell, map out the sequences, and identify the mutations, or if there is any missing elements, and then pretty much try to treat them, right? So that's where again they use databases, cloud computing, so on and so forth. And I'll give a live example of this one in my last bullet. We talked about personalized medicine. This is again, for example, like in Lonza, we have this cocoon system, which is an example of personalized medicine. But just to give you another example, Moderna, one of the companies which is launching this COVID vaccine, it has it has a platform technology, right? The mRNA platform technology. And one of the drugs that they are working on is to treat cytomegalovirus, right? The CMV, in which you have pregnant women, right? And essentially it impacts them. And this is where actually the newborn babies. So what this does is that it takes the cells of again, as I was saying earlier, of that individual, because individuals could be different, their forms and the type of diseases could be different. They can take those individual cells and map it, and then basically come back, and I'll let you know how they do that, but in the last bullet. But basically this is where you can actually individualize a treatment now, right? And that is the industry 5.0 that we are talking about, which is pretty much present and the future, mostly the future, right? Robotic surgery, I think we all know about it, done for hair transplants, done for several other techniques where people are pretty much the doctors are or the surgeons are pretty much observing, and a video feed is sent in real time, and they can direct. the robots. Epidemic outbreak prediction. This is again, it does exist. For example, malaria prediction is a great example over here, where you have, based on the temperature, based on the humidity, water conditions, based on the population size, so on and so forth, it can predict. And I hope, in the future, this could do it for Zika or for SARS or for other ones as well. But for now, we are in the state of COVID. And I just wanted to mention this because we do have a partnership. Lonza has a partnership with Moderna to manufacture their doses. But Moderna is one along with Pfizer. So that's other one. But Moderna is the one which uses the mRNA technology. It's the leading vaccine for the COVID treatment, and it's based on mRNA technology, where maybe I don't want to, just for the time's sake, I don't want to go into the detail of the whole technology, but very briefly, what you do is that you understand, let's say, the COVID virus, right? So you have the virus, the coronavirus, I mean, and you take its genomic sequence, right, which is shared now. That's where the data sharing comes. What they did is that they took that genome, and they created it on an mRNA. If you remember your biology again, mRNAs are the ones that are single stranded, come from the double stranded DNA, and they have a whole code written where from the nucleus they get onto the cytoplasm, and then they get onto the ribosomes. You remember those 30 and 30s units and 70s units and all that, and then they basically produce the proteins, right? So with that, what they do is that they take this mRNA, code it with the with that same sequence that the virus has, and then they administer it into the body with that sequence, and they can target it pretty much. What it does is that it creates immune response, right, antibodies or whatever, against that particular protein, right, which is not the virus, but it is the same and much lighter dose, obviously. And once your antibodies and immune system is activated, then it goes into the memory cells, and right, so next time around when you get attacked by the coronavirus, your body is already equipped to respond, right? So that's where how the vaccine works. That's their technology. They started their phase 3 trials just a few days ago, probably earlier this week, I would say Monday, Tuesday, and phase 3 trials. So hopefully in a couple of months' time, again, you think about the speed and the pace, right? We're talking about technology. Typically, it takes 12 years, but now we're talking about a platform technology where, let's say, it hit us, in February. Well, actually, I would say end of last year when it hit in China, and then February, March is when it became a pandemic. And from then on, in 6 months to a year's time, I know everyone is really waiting on this, but the fact of the matter is that we could potentially come up with a vaccine within 1 year. I think there is one that's already approved. I've heard it's in China. Yesterday, I heard someone saying that it was approved in Russia, but it's something where they're, pun intended, but basically they are saying that it is only available for their military. So I'm not sure how true that is or not,